I used to believe that if you worked hard enough, loved your family fiercely enough, and saved every dollar you could carve out a little corner of peace in this world. I thought peace came with property lines and neighborhood smiles. I thought I'd finally found it when we moved into Willow Creek. My name is James Callahan. I'm a retired civil engineer, now a full-time dad to my 12-year-old daughter, Emma. And this is the story of how a neighborhood that promised safety and stability nearly killed her, and how I made sure justice was served when no one else would. We moved into Willow Creek on a bright April morning. Birds chirped on the power lines. The moving truck backed in slow over smooth pavement. The sun hit our freshly painted porch just right. It was the kind of day you remember forever, the day you think things finally turn around. My wife, Lorna, was so happy she cried when she saw Emma playing barefoot on the grass. Emma was drawing with sidewalk chalk giant sunflowers, little birds, a big smiling sun that covered half the driveway. It was the first time I saw her completely relaxed in months. You see, Emma has epilepsy. Not the kind with warning signs, the kind that sneaks up in the middle of laughter. 1 second she's fine, the next, she's on the ground, her body stiff, her hands trembling violently. We've spent too many nights in emergency rooms, too many birthdays clouded by new medication trials. She's the bravest soul I've ever known, but she's fragile. That's why we moved here. Willow Creek was advertised as a secure, family-oriented community protected by HOA regulations. At the time, that sounded like a promise. Now, I know it was a threat. The first few days were quiet, almost dreamlike. Neighbors waved politely. One man brought us a pie, though he mispronounced our last name. The lawns were perfectly mowed. Flags hung evenly. Garbage bins vanished like clockwork on Monday mornings. There was an eerie perfection to it all, but we needed peace, and we welcomed it. Emma loved it more than we did. She started leaving chalk messages on the sidewalk every morning, things like, "Have a magical day" or "Be kind," even when it's hard. The mailman said she was his favorite stop. Lorna began planting hydrangeas in the front yard, and I started fixing up the backyard shed. We had plans, big, small, beautiful ones. One night at dinner, Emma asked, "Daddy, do you think I can stay here forever?" I smiled. I hope so. Baby, I really do. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, staring at the calm sky and wondering if this was finally it. If maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind us. But somewhere deep down, maybe it was intuition, maybe it was exhaustion. I felt it, a flicker of unease. There was something off about the way people smiled here, like they were watching, waiting. Like our arrival had stirred something beneath the pristine surface. I saw her for the first time 3 days after we moved in. She stood across the street, arms crossed, a clipboard pressed to her chest, gray bobbed hair, narrow eyes, and a scowl that could pierce steel. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just stared for almost 2 minutes straight. I nudged Lorna. "Do we know her?" She frowned. "I think she's the HOA president. Someone called her Karen. She came by before the move-in to check our paperwork." The name felt fitting in a way I couldn't explain. I didn't know it then, but that woman would become the source of our deepest nightmares. She wasn't just any HOA president. She was the kind who didn't just enforce rules, she created them, manipulated them, weaponized them, and she had already marked us as trouble. But in that moment, I brushed it off. I just wanted Emma to be happy. I wanted her to feel normal, safe. Let us know where you're watching from today, and if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community, because peace is a fragile thing, and sometimes it's the people who claim to protect it who destroy it the fastest. I remember the first real encounter with her like it happened 5 minutes ago. It was a Tuesday morning. Emma was outside drawing on the sidewalk with her usual rainbow-colored chalks. She had sketched a field of flowers and written the words, "You are loved." I was fixing a loose board on the porch when I heard it. That's against HOA guidelines. I looked up, and there she was, standing on the edge of our property line, like a gargoyle with a clipboard, her lips pursed, sunglasses on despite the clouds. I stood up and wiped my hands. "Excuse me." She pointed at the drawing with her pen. Sidewalk defacement. Section 7, subsection C. Decorative markings must be approved by the HOA board. I chuckled at first, thinking it was a joke. It's just chalk. Washes away with the rain. She didn't laugh. That's not the point. Rules are rules. If every child started scribbling moral slogans on public walkways, this neighborhood would look like a circus. Emma stood behind me, holding her pink chalk. Her hand trembled just a little. I placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll clean it up," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Karen gave a tight smile. "Please do. And in the future, if your daughter wants to express herself, she can do it on paper." Then she turned and walked away, like she'd just saved the community from vandalism. That was our introduction to Karen Albright, president of the Willow Creek HOA for 8 years and self-proclaimed guardian of community standards. She wasn't elected, she ran unopposed. And everyone I talked to seemed too scared or too tired to challenge her. Over the next week, we began noticing things. Our garbage bins were moved 2 inches back toward the garage every Tuesday morning, just enough to violate the curb clearance rule she later emailed us about. A letter arrived noting that our mailbox was not in aesthetic harmony with the other homes. Emma's bike left leaning against the porch got us a second warning. I started to see her more often walking the sidewalks with her phone out, snapping photos of flower pots, paint chips, even Emma's stuffed animals in the window. "She's targeting us," Lorna whispered one evening as we collected yet another warning notice from the mailbox. "I don't want to believe that," I replied. But I already did. It wasn't just us. I noticed she'd cornered a teenage boy down the street because his hoodie had a skull on it. Another time, she stood yelling at an elderly neighbor for leaving a holiday wreath up past January. But there was something about Emma that rubbed her the wrong way. One morning, I was taking Emma to school when Karen stepped out from behind a hedge like she was lying in wait. She gave Emma a long look and said, "She seems dramatic." I froze. "Excuse me." She tilted her head, voice syrupy and smug. "Just saying. Some children like attention, especially if they have conditions." I couldn't speak. Emma lowered her eyes, pretending not to hear, but I saw the way her shoulders tightened, the way her fingers curled into her sleeves. That night, Emma didn't eat dinner. She said she felt wrong being outside. I told her everything was fine, but I could feel it too. Something in the air. The pressure of being watched and judged for every breath. Lorna suggested we talk to the HOA board, but there was no board, just Karen and her appointed cronies, none of whom ever answered their phones. We tried ignoring her, hoping she'd grow bored, but Karen didn't get bored. She got bolder. One Saturday, we came home to find a yellow tag nailed to our door, notice of violation pending fine. The offense, unapproved sidewalk activity. It was Emma's chalk drawings again. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about rules. It wasn't about order or regulations. It was about control. And Karen was the kind of person who needed everyone to obey or else. Let me be clear, I'm not the kind of man who picks fights. I built bridges, both literally and metaphorically. I believe in reason, in civility. But reason doesn't work with people like Karen, because people like her, they don't want resolution. They want submission. And the more we resisted even silently, the more dangerous she became. I wish I could say that was the worst of it. But the worst was still to come. The warnings turned into something darker. It started with whispers. One afternoon, Emma came home from school quieter than usual. She closed her door without saying much, which wasn't like her. I waited a few minutes, then knocked gently. "Sweetheart." She didn't answer. I opened the door slowly. She was sitting on the floor, arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the carpet. "What happened?" She looked up, tears pooling. "A girl said her mom told her I make things up, that I'm just trying to get sympathy." I knelt beside her. "What do you mean?" She said her mom saw me on the sidewalk, that I was shaking on purpose. She said I was pretending to be sick because I like attention. My chest burned. There was no doubt in my mind where that idea came from. That night, I stood in the backyard alone, looking across the fence at Karen's perfectly trimmed rose bushes, every petal flawless, not a single leaf out of place. I thought about marching over, demanding she keep my daughter's name out of her mouth. But then I remembered how she worked, not through confrontation, but corrosion. She didn't shout. She poisoned. The next morning, a letter arrived in our mailbox. This time, it wasn't typed. It was handwritten. You should be ashamed using your daughter's condition to get sympathy. This community deserves better than your kind of drama. You're disturbing the peace. No signature, just neat cursive on HOA stationery. Lorna was livid. She crossed a line. I wanted to report it, but to whom? The HOA that was her. The police. Over a letter. There was no threat, just venom. No crime, just cruelty. But the damage was done. Emma stopped drawing. She stopped waving at neighbors. She started walking with her head down, afraid someone might be watching. We tried to keep her spirits up. We made movie nights. Let her pick dinner. But the glow in her eyes had dimmed, and I hated that I didn't know how to fix it. One evening, around dusk, we were in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner. Emma was outside picking wildflowers in the yard. The sun was low, casting long shadows. I heard her call for her mom, something about a cat stuck in the bushes. Lorna went to help her. 10 minutes later, she stormed back inside, clutching something in her hand. A folded paper. Another note. Children who can't behave don't belong in respectable neighborhoods. Maybe she should be somewhere special, away from the rest of us. Lorna's hand shook. This was taped to the side of our trash can. Emma saw it. I sat down slowly, the words sinking in like stones in my stomach. She wasn't just being petty anymore. She was isolating my daughter, dehumanizing her, turning the entire neighborhood into a silent jury, and we were on trial. The final straw came 2 days later. I was at work, and Lorna had taken Emma to a routine doctor's appointment. When they returned, Karen was waiting in front of our house, arms folded like she owned the sidewalk. "What's this?" she said, pointing to the handicapped placard in our car window. "It's for Emma," Lorna replied, stepping out of the car. Karen laughed an ugly nasal sound. "You people sure love pretending. I Googled epilepsy. Doesn't mean you can't walk." Emma shrank behind her mother, burying her face in Lorna's coat. Lorna spoke through clenched teeth. "Get off our property." Karen leaned in, voice low. "You're drawing attention to yourselves. That's not how we do things here. You're making this neighborhood uncomfortable." Then she smiled and walked away. That night, I called an old colleague of mine, an attorney who'd worked in civil rights law. I told him everything. He listened carefully, then said something I'll never forget. "She's baiting you. She wants you to react, because if you do, she can label you as unstable, as the problem." I realized he was right. I couldn't lash out. I had to stay calm, methodical. But inside, I was boiling. She was breaking something inside my daughter I didn't know how to rebuild, and I wasn't going to let her keep doing it. What I didn't know was that her cruelty was about to reach a level no father could ignore, and when it did, it nearly destroyed everything. It was a Wednesday afternoon in late May, the kind of day where the breeze carries the scent of cut grass and kids laugh their way home from school. It should have been uneventful, peaceful. Instead, it became the day I almost lost my daughter. Emma had just gotten home. Lorna was running late from the grocery store, and I was finishing up a phone call in the kitchen. Emma went out to the front yard with her drawing notebook, something she hadn't touched in weeks. I remember smiling when I saw her through the window. For the first time in a long while, she looked calm. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Then I heard a thump. I turned sharply toward the front window, and my heart seized. Emma was on the ground, her arms stiff, her eyes wide open but not seeing anything. Her body started to jerk violently, legs twitching, her head knocking against the edge of the walkway. I dropped the phone and sprinted out the door, barefoot. I remember screaming her name, kneeling beside her, trying to keep her from hurting herself. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. "Emma, stay with me, sweetheart. Stay with me." Then I heard another voice, sharp, cold, and unmistakable. "What is she doing now?" Karen's voice called out from her porch. Again, I whipped around. She stood there with her arms crossed, no urgency, no concern. She didn't move, didn't even flinch. I shouted, "Call an ambulance." She raised an eyebrow. "Isn't this the same performance from last time, call?" 911. Now I yelled, louder this time, panic taking over. But instead of dialing an ambulance, she reached for her phone and called the police. Not EMS, not fire, police. I saw her walk back into her house calmly, as if she'd just dealt with a barking dog. My hands shook as I fumbled to unlock my own phone. Finally getting through to 911. Paramedics were dispatched, but the operator told me that law enforcement had already received a report from my address about a child faking a seizure in public, possibly attempting to disturb the peace. That's the exact phrase, disturb the peace. By the time the ambulance arrived, Emma's seizure had slowed, but her lips were blue. I was sobbing, kneeling on the pavement with her head cradled in my hands. And then came the 2 patrol cars. The officers got out, hands resting on their belts, and approached me cautiously. "What's going on here?" Sir One asked, as if I was the suspect. "She had a seizure. She needs help," I cried. We received a call that a young girl was pretending to collapse, possibly to create a disturbance. The second officer said, "I remember staring at them in disbelief. Do you see her? She's barely breathing." The EMTs pushed past them and loaded Emma onto a stretcher, and all the while, from across the street, Karen stood on her porch, phone in hand, recording, not helping, not even pretending to care, just documenting. Like this was some kind of game she was winning. Lorna arrived moments later and nearly collapsed when she saw the scene. The ambulance was already pulling away. I told her to follow them, that I'd deal with everything else. One of the officers lingered, asking if there was any history of mental health episodes. I nearly punched him. When I got to the hospital, they had already stabilized Emma, but she'd suffered a mild concussion. The doctor said the seizure had likely been triggered by stress and overstimulation, and that the delay in treatment could have made things far worse. He looked at me and said, "Your daughter's lucky. A few more minutes like that, and we could have been talking about brain damage." I couldn't breathe. When Emma finally opened her eyes, she was so weak she could barely speak, but she whispered something that shattered me. Did I do something wrong? "Daddy." I broke down right there beside her bed. That night, when we got home, there was a letter taped to our door. This kind of behavior reflects poorly on the entire neighborhood. If your child continues to disrupt the community, further action will be taken. No signature, but I knew exactly who it was from. She had crossed a line. No, she had leaped over it. She delayed medical care. She called the police instead of an ambulance. She watched my daughter seize on the concrete and decided it was more important to control a narrative than save a life. And the worst part, there were no consequences. At least, not yet. Because at that point, I realized something very clearly. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was war. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by Emma's bed with a flashlight and a cup of cold coffee, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. Every few minutes, I'd reach out to touch her hand just to feel her warmth, just to be sure she was still with me. Lorna slept in the armchair beside us, curled up, her face pale from worry. She hadn't said much since the hospital. Neither had I. Because what do you say when your daughter almost dies in front of your house and your neighbor films it like she's waiting for a punchline? What do you say when no one stops her? The next morning, Emma was too weak to get out of bed. She looked at me and whispered, "Do we have to live here?" That question tore something in me. I kissed her forehead and said, "Not for long, sweetheart, I promise." But deep down, I wasn't sure what I meant by that. Move fight. Pretend it never happened later that day. The HOA sent an official letter. I remember the way Lorna read it aloud, her voice shaking, due to repeated incidents causing emotional discomfort among residents, including public outbursts and apparent staged medical emergencies. "We request that your family attend a formal hearing with the HOA board to discuss potential removal from the community per Article 14. They were trying to expel us. For medical emergencies. For having a daughter with a neurological disorder." I wanted to scream. Burn the letter. drive to Karen's house and bang on her door. But I didn't, because they wanted a reaction. They wanted the unhinged, desperate father to show his teeth so they could call him dangerous. So I waited. I listened. And that's when things took another turn. That weekend, I took Emma for a short walk in the backyard just to get some sunlight. Lorna was watering the plants while I sat with Emma under the old maple tree. She rested her head on my lap, eyes closed. For a moment, the world was quiet. Then we heard the click of a camera shutter. Karen, standing by the side fence, camera in hand, snapping photos through the wooden slats like a deranged wildlife photographer. "Get off my property," I said, my voice steady but low. She smirked. "Just documenting." For the record of what she leaned in closer, parental negligence, allowing a known unstable child unsupervised access to open terrain. "It's a liability," Emma whimpered and hid her face. Lorna shouted from behind me, "You're a monster." Karen stepped back. "Careful. That sounds threatening. I may have to report it." And then she walked off like she had all the power in the world, like the law bent to her voice. That night, Emma had a nightmare. She screamed in her sleep, thrashing against the sheets, whispering, "I don't want her to watch me anymore." It was the first time I saw Lorna cry so hard she couldn't speak, and I realized something. I wasn't just losing my daughter's health, I was losing her spirit. That's what Karen had done, not with fists or knives, but with fear. She turned our neighborhood into a prison and my daughter into a ghost. I tried calling the HOA's listed number again. Still no answer. I emailed. I got a bounce back. It was like Karen didn't even need a board, just her rules, and everyone's silence. But not everyone was silent. The next day, a woman from 3 doors down, Mrs. Marlene Hughes, retired nurse and the kindest soul in the neighborhood, left a pie on our porch with a note. I saw what she did. "You're not alone." That note meant more to me than anything in weeks. It was a spark in the dark. Proof that not everyone believed Karen's lies. That night, I sat at the dining table and stared at the letter from the HOA. And I made a decision. We weren't moving. We weren't hiding. Because if I left, Karen would do it again to another child, another family. And one day, someone's daughter wouldn't be lucky enough to survive it. I didn't know how yet, or who would help me. But I was going to stop her. I just didn't realize that the first domino had already fallen. The next few days were quiet, but not the kind of quiet you welcome. It was the silence before a storm, the kind that makes your stomach turn because you know someone's watching, waiting to strike again. Karen hadn't been seen much since the fence incident. No morning patrols, no clipboard walks. But I didn't believe for a second that she was done. If anything, her stillness made her more dangerous. We kept Emma indoors. We closed the curtains. We didn't speak to neighbors unless spoken to. And that's when the knock came. A soft, polite knock on our front door like someone who didn't want to disturb. I opened it and found Mrs. Marlene Hughes standing there, wearing a tan cardigan, her silver hair pinned neatly behind her ears. She clutched something in her hand. "I thought you might want to see this," she said softly. She handed me a small flash drive. "I have a security camera above my garage," she explained. "It's been there for years, mostly just to watch over the garden, but it caught what happened that day." I didn't say a word. I just stepped aside and motioned her in. We plugged it into my laptop. There it was. A clear, wide-angle view of our front yard from across the street. The footage played back in real time. Emma drawing, the seizure starting, me rushing to her side, and then Karen, arms crossed, standing motionless on her porch for over 2 minutes before even lifting her phone. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't confused. She was indifferent. She saw a child on the ground, foaming at the mouth, convulsing, and she just watched. Then she turned, walked back into her house, and picked up her phone. Time code 3:47 p.m. Exactly 22 seconds later, a record showed the 911 call to the police had been placed not for an ambulance, for a child disturbing the peace. I clenched my fists so tight, my knuckles cracked. She knew. I said aloud, she knew what she was doing. Marlene nodded. That's not all. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook. Inside were names and addresses, 7 of them. People she's harassed. She explained. A single mother fined for her son's wheelchair ramp being too visible. A veteran threatened with eviction because his flag was the wrong size. A woman with lupus who got a formal violation for sitting shirtless in her own backyard to get sunlight. I stared at the list. Some of these people still lived here. Some had quietly moved. She counts on silence, Marlene said, but people are tired. Lorna walked in then, saw the footage, and covered her mouth. She turned away, her body shaking. I placed a hand on her back. We're not alone anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep, not from fear, but from purpose. I stayed up compiling everything. I filed a report with the county's Civil Rights Division. I drafted a letter to the State Disability Rights Council. I began looking through HOA bylaws, every clause, every technicality, and I found something. Section 12, paragraph 4. Any officer of the HOA found to be engaging in discriminatory, negligent, or dangerous behavior toward a resident or guest shall be subject to immediate removal and investigation. That was our in. The next morning, I printed the footage screenshots and drafted a petition. Within 3 days, I had 15 signatures neighbors who'd once been silent, now quietly joining hands. A few were still afraid, but their anger was louder than their fear now. Karen must have sensed it. She resumed her patrols, but now she looked uncertain. Her eyes darted more. She clutched her clipboard tighter. She came by our house, once stood outside without speaking, then left. I think she knew something had shifted. Then came the envelope. No return address, just slipped into our mailbox. Inside was a photo of me, crouched beside Emma during her seizure, and a typed message. You should have left. Now you're making this worse for everyone. It was a threat, but not a strong one. It was desperate. She wasn't in control anymore, and she knew it. For the first time in weeks, I felt something stir inside me. Hope. Not because I believed the system would fix everything, but because I knew now we had enough truth to break her. And soon, the whole neighborhood would see her for what she truly was. I've always believed in building things, bridges, homes, solutions, but now I was preparing to dismantle something, not with a hammer or blueprint, with facts, with truth, with people who'd finally had enough. My first step was to contact Daniel Everett, a former colleague of mine turned civil litigation attorney. We hadn't spoken in years, but I remembered one thing about Dan. He hated bullies more than anyone I knew. I sent him the footage from Marlene's camera, the letters, the HOA documents, the names and stories from other neighbors. He called me back 2 hours later. This isn't just HOA harassment, he said flatly. This is civil rights abuse, ADA violations, possibly even reckless endangerment of a minor. If what I'm seeing is accurate, James, we've got a case, a real one. It was the first time I'd exhaled fully in weeks. Dan agreed to help, pro bono, because he said, this woman needs to be stopped before someone ends up in a grave. With his guidance, we started building our case. Meanwhile, I continued quietly talking to neighbors one by one. It turns out people had been watching all along. They just didn't know how to fight back. Or thought they were the only ones suffering. The family across the street, the elderly couple at the cul-de-sac, even the teenage boy Karen once accused of bringing gang culture because of his music. They all signed the petition. We gathered over 30 signatures. Marlene helped organize a quiet meeting at her house. No one spoke too loudly. No one parked out front. But the energy in that room was electric. For the first time, people weren't whispering about Karen, they were organizing against her. That night, I stood up and spoke. I'm not asking for revenge. I told them. I'm asking for justice for Emma, for everyone here who's been made to feel small or unsafe. This isn't just a matter of pride anymore. It's a matter of right and wrong. They nodded. Some cried. Others just clenched their fists. Dan helped us draft a formal complaint to the County HOA Oversight Board, complete with signed testimonies, time-stamped video footage, and medical records from the day Karen called the police instead of an ambulance. But I wasn't done. I reached out to a local news station, not one of the national giants, just a small, community-focused outlet known for exposing local corruption. I didn't give them everything, just enough to pique their interest. A child nearly died. The HOA called it a stage disruption. There was video. They bit. A reporter named Melanie Whitaker called me 2 days later. She was sharp, no nonsense, and furious within minutes of watching the footage. "This isn't a misunderstanding," she said. "This is cruelty dressed in policy. I want to run this story." I gave her my conditions. Emma's face would be blurred. Her name changed. No ambush journalism. She agreed. And then the final piece clicked into place. Dan asked me, "Do you still have your county credentials?" I did. I had worked as a certified civil zoning inspector for nearly 15 years before retiring. I still had access to the county register, still knew how to read infrastructure filings, HOA tax filings, community compliance logs. What I found in Karen's paperwork made my blood run cold. Over the last 3 years, she had funneled HOA funds into beautification projects that had no records of actual completion, payments made to shell contractors, gardening bills triple the going rate, and all approved by a board that hadn't formally met in 2 years. It wasn't just about abuse of power, it was embezzlement. Dan smiled when I showed him. Well, now we're playing chess. By the end of that week, we filed everything with the HOA Oversight Council, the State Disability Rights Board, and the County Auditor's Office. I didn't sleep the night before the official HOA meeting. Neither did Lorna. Emma stayed with Marlene that evening. We didn't want her anywhere near what was coming. And when the morning arrived, I put on the same suit I wore to my father's funeral. Because I wasn't going to a meeting. I was going to bury someone's reign. The Willow Creek Community Hall had never been that full before. Rows of metal chairs clanged against the tile floor as neighbors filed in, some whispering, others silent, all carrying the same tension in their eyes. You could feel it in the air. Something was about to happen, and everyone knew it involved Karen. I stood near the back of the room, flanked by Dan Everett, my attorney, and Marlene, who clutched her notepad like it was a shield. Lorna stayed home with Emma. We didn't want her anywhere near the storm. She'd suffered enough. Karen entered fashionably late, as always. She wore beige slacks, a pearl-button blouse, and that same cold smile that said, "I'm untouchable." She walked slowly toward the front table, clipboard in hand, flanked by her 2 advisors, Bob from landscaping and Cheryl from the welcome committee, both of whom had rubber-stamped her every decision for years. As she took the microphone, her voice rang through the small speakers. Overly pleasant. "Good morning, everyone. Before we begin our usual HOA updates, I just want to thank you all for attending. It's always wonderful to see so much engagement from our residents." Dan stepped forward, clear and direct. "Excuse me, Madam Chair. Before proceeding, we're submitting a formal petition for immediate HOA leadership suspension and a full investigative review." Karen's smile didn't even flicker. "On what grounds?" Dan opened his leather folder and began distributing copies of our report to the table. "On the grounds of harassment, discrimination against a minor with a disability, endangerment, and multiple counts of financial misconduct within HOA operations." Gasps, whispers. A few chairs scraped backward. Karen laughed softly. "Is this about the Callahan girl again? That child has been nothing but a disruption to this peaceful neighborhood. I've been patient. I've tried to be accommodating. But it's clear this family is determined to smear." Dan didn't let her finish. "Let the footage speak for itself." He turned toward the screen. Marlene wheeled in the projector and clicked play. There, in grainy but clear video, Emma appeared on screen, sitting peacefully on the sidewalk, drawing. Then, the sudden drop, her small body convulsing, me rushing to her, the panic, the screams. Then, Karen, in her doorway, not moving, not calling for help, just watching. The room went dead silent. When the clip ended, the timestamp was visible. Over 2 minutes had passed before she even touched her phone, and when she did, she called the police, not medical services. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came. Dan turned the page. Now let's discuss the HOA's internal finances. These are copies of expenditures under your leadership, $9,200 in landscape enhancement with no matching work orders or contractor filings. Beautification funds wired to a separate account with your name listed on the bank statements. 3 years of unchecked discretionary spending. Someone from the crowd called out. Is that why we haven't had streetlights fixed in 6 months? Another voice added. She fined me for leaving my porch light on too long. Karen stepped back, visibly shaken. These are lies, she said through clenched teeth. This is a setup, probably doctored, multiple verified documents, Dan said calmly. Verified through public record and submitted to the county auditor's office. And then, as if on cue, a tall woman in a navy blazer entered the room. She held up a badge, Brenda King, HOA Oversight Committee, County Enforcement Division. She walked calmly to the front and said, we received these complaints, reviewed the evidence, and as of 7 this morning, have approved an emergency interim order to suspend Karen Albright from all HOA duties pending full investigation. The crowd erupted. Applause. Gasps. A few shouted about time or she doesn't represent us. Karen's face collapsed. She looked left and right, searching for support. Her advisors shrank away from her. No one stood by her side. And then the twist she never saw coming. Dan leaned in and said, you might want to call a lawyer. We're also filing a civil suit on behalf of the Callahan family and several other residents you've abused. Karen's lips quivered. She looked at me, hatred in her eyes. You think this makes you a hero? I stepped forward and met her gaze. No. It makes me a father. Security entered moments later to escort her out. Not in handcuffs, not yet, but her posture said it all. Shoulders tight, chin down, steps shaky. Her kingdom had crumbled. As she crossed the threshold, a little girl in the back whispered, is she gone now? Mommy. And the mother replied, yes, honey. She's not in charge anymore. Karen paused at the door, heard it, and kept walking. Outside, a news van's camera zoomed in on her face. Melanie Whitaker was waiting with a microphone. She didn't flinch when Karen scowled. By the time Karen disappeared around the corner, the crowd had started talking about a new beginning. And me, I just stood there, breathing deeply. For the first time in months, Emma would never know how close she came to being erased from this world by someone hiding behind a clipboard and a smile. But now the world would know who Karen really was. It took less than 2 weeks for the full truth to come crashing down. Karen tried to fight back. Of course. She filed a complaint claiming defamation, accused us of public character assassination, and even hinted at legal action against the news station. None of it worked, because the system she once used as a weapon had turned against her. The HOA Oversight Council launched a formal investigation, and within days, a temporary board was installed led by Marlene and 3 longtime residents who had once been too scared to speak up. That fear was gone now. We weren't just rebuilding trust. We were building something stronger. Karen was served an official notice to appear for a civil hearing related to misuse of community funds, violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and multiple counts of misconduct under neighborhood association law. Dan walked me through the process, calmly and clearly, but even he couldn't hide his smirk when the official documents were signed. She'll never run an HOA again, he said. And if the county auditor finds what we think they will, she's facing more than just community shunning. She's facing charges. And they did find it. A pattern of inflated vendor contracts, duplicate payments to phantom contractors, $36,000 unaccounted for over a 3-year span. It wasn't just neglect, it was fraud. And soon enough, Karen Albright was standing in a courtroom, not at a neighborhood meeting, answering to a real judge. Emma didn't come with us that day. She was home, baking cookies with Lorna and trying to reclaim the childhood that Karen had tried to take from her. But I brought a photo of her, just a small one, tucked into my pocket. I wanted Karen to know who this was all for. When the judge read out the charges, Karen didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just stared at the wall, like someone who had finally realized the walls were closing in. The court ruled that she repay the misused HOA funds, stripped her of all community authority, and barred her from participating in any neighborhood leadership role for life. She was also required to issue a formal public apology under court order. That apology aired on the very news station that had first broken the story. I regret that my actions caused distress to the Callahan family and others. She read stiffly, lips pursed. I misunderstood the severity of certain situations and failed to respond with proper judgment. It was hollow, but it was on the record, and her face broadcast across town was now tied to shame, not control. But the most satisfying moment came 1 week later. Lorna and I were walking with Emma through the newly reopened community park. Marlene had helped organize a neighborhood picnic to bring people together again. Kids played tag under the trees. Someone grilled hot dogs. Music played from a Bluetooth speaker near the gazebo. Emma clutched my hand and looked up at me. "Can I draw on the sidewalk again?" I knelt beside her. "You can draw the whole street if you want." She grinned, pulled out her chalk, and started sketching a giant butterfly, bright orange wings. Smiling face. Within minutes, other kids joined her. Someone drew a rainbow. Another child added a tree. The sidewalk became a mural of color and joy, and for the first time in what felt like forever, no one came to stop them. No one threatened a fine. No one called it defacement. They just let the children be children. Later that afternoon, I saw a familiar car driving slowly down the far side of the neighborhood. Karen's car. Her window was up, and her face, partially hidden by sunglasses, looked thinner, drawn. She didn't stop. She didn't wave. She just kept driving. Toward the exit. Toward irrelevance. Someone beside me muttered, "She can't control anything anymore, and it's eating her alive." But I didn't feel hate in that moment. I felt something simpler, something cleaner, relief, because I had fought for my daughter, and I'd won. Not with rage, not with violence, but with truth, and with a community that had finally remembered its heart. That day, we painted a new chapter onto the concrete. And Emma, she drew a sign next to her butterfly. It read, "Safe, at last." It's been 6 months since that day in the park. The chalk murals have faded with the rain, but the feeling they left behind, that feeling of freedom, of safety, still lingers in the cracks of the pavement. Emma laughs more now. Her hands don't tremble when she picks up her colored pencils. She hums when she draws. And at night, she sleeps without fear that someone is watching from across the street. I sit on the porch most evenings with a cup of coffee in one hand and peace in the other. We still live in the same house, same street, but it's not the same neighborhood anymore because people found their voice. They stopped apologizing for being different. They stopped letting fear decide who gets to belong. And I learned what it means to protect something precious, not with anger, but with resolve. See, Karen thought power came from a title and a clipboard. But real power, it comes from love, from refusing to back down when your child's life is treated like an inconvenience, from standing up not just for your own, but for every person too afraid to speak. We didn't just survive what happened here, we transformed it. So if you're a parent listening to this, or someone who's been bullied into silence by people hiding behind fake authority, don't give up. Don't let them convince you that following the rules means letting others break you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay. And when you do, you might just find you're not alone after all. If you believe in justice and love seeing HOA Karens get what they deserve, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel HOA Revenge. We post gripping, real-life HOA dramas every day that you won't want to miss. Your support keeps us going. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next story.